Hello, my name is Dr. Gwen Martin. I am an instructor at Ball State University, and today I have the pleasure of going over inter-observer agreement with you. Um, I'm going to start out with this story. It's always great to know why we collect IOA data. What's the purpose? My doctorate is in psychology, but I'm also a board certified behavior analyst. Long time ago, I was providing consultation services for a little girl in a school setting. The behavior was hitting, um, open hand, coming in contact with another person's body part, whether it was their face, shoulder, back, but it was an open hand to body contact. So I went to the school, I conducted a functional behavioral assessment, I developed an intervention. I trained everyone on the intervention. I collected data. I trained everyone on the data collection system. I stayed there for a couple of weeks and then I started to fade myself out. The behavior had decreased. It wasn't completely gone, but it had decreased to a level that the teacher could handle it. And I could fade out with the goal to do check-ins every week or couple of weeks or so. So when I left, the behavior had, like I said, decreased. And I came back a couple of weeks later just to check in to see how things were going. And I noticed that the behavior had increased based on the data that the teacher had shared with me. And, I was a little frustrated at first because we'd done a lot of work. We'd gotten the behavior down to a level that the teacher could handle, and then to come back and find out that it had increased almost back to baseline was a little frustrating. So I did a little digging, talked with everyone, collected some data myself, and at the end of the day, I realized that the operational definition had been miscommunicated. So when I had told the teachers that a hit was open hand contact to another person, whether it was face, back, hand, didn't matter, body part, I forgot to say the intensity of the hit. So, for example, when the class would play a game like Duck, Duck, Goose, think about it. The child, for those of you who are familiar with the game, the child goes around a circle of peers, tapping a shoulder or back or arm, and they say duck, 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 goose. Well, duck, 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 goose. What's five? It's five hits. Duck, 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 goose. Five hits. According to my definition, that was a hit. Open hand, came in contact with a peer on the shoulder, that was a hit. Never talked about the intensity. So we basically had about 2 weeks of unreliable data that we couldn't use. Now, had I collected IOA data, had I come in at least once a week to collect IOA data, I would have known that the count was off. So this is an introduction to why it is so important to collect IOA data. So let me tell you what it is. IOA, Inter-Observer Agreement, I'm going to say IOA for the remainder of this video. IOA is a procedure for comparing independent observations from two or more people on the same events. So in that case, IOA would have been a comparison of my data collection of the behavior and the teacher or the TA's data collection on the same event, which would have been the hitting. It enhances the believability of the data. It's computed by comparing the number of agreements between an independent observer and the observer collecting the behavioral data. So going back to my example, it would have been computed by comparing my data with the TA's data or my data with the teacher's data. Everyone who had been trained on the data and was collecting data, it would have been a comparison between our data to make sure that we are actually collecting data on the behavior as it was defined, as it should be collected. There are a few purposes of collecting IOA: to measure reliability. How reliable is your data? To ensure that new observers are competent in measuring the behavior, to make sure that any new person who comes in and collects data, for example, when the TA came in to collect data or when the teacher collected data, say someone that I didn't have a chance to train or someone that I did train, um, to make sure that they are competent and they know the definition and how we are measuring the behavior, to detect observer drift, to validate the operational definition of the behavior. In my situation, we weren't operating on the same operational definition because I didn't give all the information. Big mistake there. The stronger your IOA, the more reliable your data. Um, there are methods to strengthen your IOA data. You want to use the same measurement system, maybe the same tools, the same stopwatch, same intervention tools for collecting data. You want to use the same measurement system. You want to try to evaluate in the same venue, live versus video. You want to try to watch from the same viewpoint. Let's say that I'm watching the student from the back of the class and the other person who's collecting IOA is watching the student from the front of the class. Well, we're going to have two different views of that student. So one of us may see something that the other one doesn't see. So a way to strengthen your IOA is to make sure we're both watching. Make sure you're both watching from the same viewpoint. Start at the same time. If I start 3 seconds earlier than the other person, I may pick up on some behaviors that the other person doesn't, and our IOA percentage is going to be off. Score separately or independently. When you are collecting IOA data, you don't want to sit side by side and look at each other's data, because then if I see that I missed one, I may write it down really quickly. But to truly know that you are comparing independent observations of the behavior, you want to collect your data separately. And even if you are sitting side by side, don't look at each other's data. You want to collect your data independently. And train accurately on the operational definition. I can't say how important that is from personal experience to train accurately on the operational definition. Had I done that, that was, I think we would not have had to throw out a couple of weeks of good data. So now that I've talked to you a little bit about what is IOA and why IOA is so important, let's look at how to assess or how to collect IOA data. Now, the easiest way I can boil this down for you, you'll read more about this in your reading material, your text, but the best way I can boil this down is to look at it from two different perspectives. You have your event-based methods, and then you can have your time-based methods. The method chosen depends on the type of data that has been collected. So for example, if you collected frequency data, you would use an event-based method. But if you collected duration data, you would use a time-based method. Does that make sense? Event-based methods, this is based on the number of times the behavior occurred, i.e. like frequency. It's typically done with frequency counts, and there are a few different methods for collecting event-based IOA data. I'm going to focus on the most commonly used, which is total count. Like I said, there are other methods. Please review your Cooper book, pages 114 through 116, I believe, to really get the meat of the other types of event-based methods of collecting IOA, but I'm going to go over the most common one for this, which is total count. So total count is taken on the frequency that each observer collects data on the behavior, and then you take the lower count divided by the higher count and multiply it by 100. This will yield your total count IOA percentage. So for example, let's say that I'm working with Justin Timberlake. Yay! And he and I are going to collect data at one of his smaller concerts, and we want to see how many head nods we get. So when people are listening to his music, we want to see how many head nods we get, okay? So he and I would watch at the same time. All of those things that I talked about with strengthening your IOA data. We take our data independently. We'd start at the same time. We both discuss exactly what is a head nod and agreed on that operational definition. And then we would compare our data. So let's say I got 50 head nods, and he got 100 head nods. Well, we would take the lower count, which would be mine, 50, divided by 100, which would be his, and then multiply that by 100. And then that would yield our percentage for IOA. If he got 80 and I got 120, then we would do the same thing, except we take his lower count. So it's the lower count. Doesn't matter who took it, which one of us had the lower count. The focus here is the lower count, and divide that by the higher count. So if he got 80 and I got 120, then we would divide 80 by 120, multiply that by 100, and then we would have the total count IOA percentage. Now let's say that we both got 94. 94 divided by 94 is 1. 1 times 100 is 100. So we have 100% for that. And that does happen, which is awesome when it does. Later, I'm going to discuss percentages that are acceptable, but let's just continue to go over the types of IOA. So that would be total count. And again, there are other methods. Please review your Cooper text. There are time-based methods also. This is based on the amount of time that the behavior occurs. Like, for example, duration. And just like with event-based methods, there are other time-based methods, and this video would be very long if I went through each one of them, which is why I keep referring you back to your Cooper book. But let me just give you an example of total duration IOA. This is a method of collecting IOA on duration. So it would be very similar to total count. You take the shorter duration divided by the longer duration and multiply that by 100, and you would have the total duration IOA percentage. So if Justin Timberlake and I measured how long people actually pay attention to his music before they zone out or before they fall asleep, although how could you fall asleep with Justin Timberlake? You can tell it's one of my favorite artists. But let's say we collected data on how long people pay attention or people listen before they fall asleep, and we've defined listening as eyes open, looking at the stage, and kind of nodding their heads and smiling and grooving to the music. So let's say that we did that, and let's say that I saw that for 20 minutes, people were engaged in watching, and then he saw that for 30 minutes. Well, we divide 20 by 30, multiply that by 100, and we'd have the total duration IOA percentage. Okay? Now, there are other methods outside of event and time-based. For example, another method of time-based would be mean duration per occurrence IOA. There's also interval-based methods. Examples of interval-based methods are interval by interval IOA, scored interval IOA, unscored interval IOA. Again, to go over each one of those, this would be a very long video. Please read your Cooper book, page, 116 to 119. I'm looking at my notes here. Yeah, so if you go to your Cooper book and you at least look at page 114 to 119, you should get all of the info on the different types of IOA. So when should IOA be collected? Now, there are different views on this based on who and what you're reading. Some sources I've read go as low as 20%, while others go as high as 30%. The preferred amount is between 25 to 30% of your sessions. 25 to 30% of your sessions. And you want to spread that out. So, for example, you don't want to do all 30% of your sessions in baseline. Let's say baseline takes a really long time. Your first baseline takes a really long time. You don't only want to do IOA in baseline, because then you won't know how it was towards intervention. Or let's say you're doing an ABAB withdrawal design. Well, in your last intervention, you won't know what the IOA is. And for all you know, observer drift could have happened, and then your data is unreliable. So you want to spread it out. So the preferred amount is 25 to 30% of your sessions. So, for example, if you conduct 20 sessions in your experiment or your behavior change project, then you should collect IOA for at least how many sessions? Little math test here. I'll give you time. If you said 4, that's correct because that would be 25% of your sessions. And like I said before, it's important to spread your IOA collection across your project, your experiment. If I had, going back to my example, if I had done that, if I had done at least 25% IOA and I had done it across the life of the intervention of working with this little girl, I would have caught that our count was off. So that leads us to the question to what is an acceptable level of IOA? The closer you get to 100% agreement, the better. If you can have 100% agreement across your entire intervention, that's awesome. There's no need to retrain on your data collection system. However, if IOA falls below 80%, it's time to retrain. This means that the data that's collected may not be as reliable because IOA increases reliability, may not be as reliable as it should be. So the higher your IOA, the more reliable your data. And I believe everyone knows what I mean by retrain. If in my case, the IOA definitely fell way below 80%. So what I had to do was to sit down with the teacher, the TAs, anyone who was there at that time who was going to be collecting data and retrain on the operational definition, the data collection system, retrain on everything. And I even left a video and a visual aid for anyone else who was going to come in and collect data. So I had to retrain and then stay around, check in a little bit more, a minimum of 25%, check in more to collect IOA data just to make sure that we were on track. So I hope this was helpful. Again, please review this material in your Cooper book. As always, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to contact your instructor. Have a great day.